Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we continue our retrospective on the Bloodthirsty trilogy, a triptych of supernatural horror from Japanese director Michio Yamamoto, with tonight's movie Lake of Dracula. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's film, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, editor of the Castle of Horror Anthology, our very first horror story anthology coming this July. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. And also in Austin, writer of the long-running underground comic series Halloween Man and winner of the 2018 Best of Austin Award from the Austin Chronicle, Mr. Drew Edwards. Say hello.
Hello.
Hello, hello. And finally, also in Denver, as always, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman of the Guzman Immigration of Denver. Why do I keep putting a "the" in front of it? Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello, Julia.
Hello, and I actually have a story in that anthology you mentioned.
That's right. That's right. And I don't know. We'll talk about it in the endorsement, because by gum, I'm going to endorse this anthology because most of the stories are not by me, and I really want to bring attention to it. So, yes. All right. So, Lake of Dracula. This is a 1971 Japanese horror film from Michio Yamamoto, the same guy who directed The Vampire Doll from last week. It's about a girl who encounters a European-style vampire who sets out on a very Hammer Dracula-style course of kind of eliminating the people around her and her. And it shares not only a director, but several cast members as the last film. So let's get opening thoughts. Let's go, Julia. We haven't started with you in a while. Julia, Drew, I know you have thoughts. Tony, you kicked us off last week, and so I'm curious what you'll think about this, and then I'll go. So Julia, Lake of Dracula, what do you think?
It's interesting. There are some things that I thought were really unusual about this film. One of them is that the fighting. I was really impressed with the fighting. I felt like these people were really pummeling each other whenever anybody was fighting. I just was like kind of taken aback by it, because normally I feel like, there's a lot of cutting away and just kind of flashy photography to make it look like people are fighting, but you never really see. But I just really feared for these guys in this, particularly the boyfriend, the main hero. He just seemed to really be getting beat up a lot. Anyway, so that poor guy. But so the vampire is creepy for sure. And I love the effect of I love some of the special effects, like the deterioration effect and that kind of thing when they finally kind of dissolve or whatever. And so I think that was good. The story kind of left me, wanting more. I just kind of was like, okay. So this guy is a vampire and he wants this girl, and it's kind of creepy because he's like, I wish that you could have been my bride, like however many years ago when she was 10. I mean, that was just kind of freaked out by that. Anyways, there was some stuff about the story that just, it left me empty, but there were some neat effects, and it was definitely unusual.
Very good. Drew, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, as we were talking about before we started recording, I've actually seen this movie once before when I was a kid on, I would assume, cable TV. So this is the second time that I've seen this. Tony and I have been discussing this for over a year now. Mm-hmm. Because I knew I had seen one of these films, but I wasn't sure which one. And I although when I heard the titles and I heard Lake of Dracula, I had a pretty strong feeling because I remember there being people wandering around a lake.
Yeah.
So, it was interesting now, because you have a character that is revisiting her childhood and then moving into adult. I thought that was kind of thematically appropriate. I really liked this movie. In some ways, I actually think it's an improvement on Vampire Doll, which is a little more... Vampire Doll is a little more artsy.
Yeah.
I think this one, one of the things that I found interesting about last one is that it was a Japanese recreation of this very Western thing.
Yeah.
I feel like this is definitely much more so of that. Like the effects are very Hammer style. You have a vampire wandering around in a cloak. It's, you know, thunder and lightning again. There's even kind of a Renfield character. There's kind of a Dr. Seward
Played
character.
by the same actor, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah, it's literally the same. This is the Michael Ripper of these films. This guy is just, I wonder if he's going to make it to the third movie. I'm gonna bet that he does.
There's also stuff that I think that, you know, you see influential in later horror stuff. You know, certainly the lake setting made me think of Friday the 13th. The fact that like the vampire had these sort of yellowy gold eyes made me think of the yellow-eyed demon in Supernatural. So like I feel like that there must be other people that have somehow stumbled across this movie and it stayed in their subconscious a little bit. Very stylish, you know, clipped along very, very well. In fact, I would say better than Vampire Doll. I just really had a good time watching this movie. I do have some slight problems with the end of the movie, but I'm going to hold my thoughts off until we get to that part.
All right, very good. Fantastic. Tony, give us your thoughts.
I like it. I think it's cool to see yet another like Dracula movie through the lens of Japan. So Japanese cultural stuff going on with you know, all the cast, and then hey, by the way, here's Western Vampire.
Yes.
He's getting shipped in from somewhere, and now Japan has to deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the movie. I just love how stylish these films are. It's not quite the boldness of Technicolor. It's like somewhere between that and Hammer.
Yeah.
I mean, it skews towards Hammer, but there's like the palette, the makeup. You know, when we can talk more about the makeup later, but you know, when the girls get turned,
yes,
their white makeup is definitely a combination of kind of Japanese theatrical makeup and vampiric you know, stuff we've seen from the West.
Yeah.
It's just such a cool, strange combo. You know, it makes me want to, you know, I can imagine, you know, this director just binging Hammer stuff and going, you know what, I'm gonna make that.
Right.
This is where
that's
I'm
exactly
at right
right.
now. I dig it. I love, and you know, Julia picked up on it. I was going to talk about it a little bit too. All the fight sequences, when we get to that, man, you know, it does feel like a brawl, or you feel a sense of kind of out of control danger.
Yeah.
That maybe you don't always see when you see people filming action.
Totally.
Yeah. And it feels realistic in a strange movie that's not very realistic in a lot of other ways.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like porn. I think they actually are fighting. Like, I don't think it's stage fighting. I think it's actually
right. Well,
fighting.
I mean, you know, you pull your punches. I mean, nobody's gonna hurt the other actor, but the way that they do it, they've decided,
the scrambling
like,
and wrestling,
yeah.
like especially the wrestling in the car. There's
a
scene where
that sequence is great.
Yeah, that was really, really good.
Yeah, that's when I was really impressed by. I was like, oh my gosh, this poor guy, he's getting pummeled.
Yeah, but I like the movie a lot.
So let's start it off. We open up in this in the past. It's not really clear to us that it's the past because we're sitting here in 2019, so we can't tell, you know, 1971 clothing from 1958 clothing. Basically, in this thing. Anyway, in some past, a 10-year-old girl is running around with her really sweet dog, and she finds, and they're at the cliffside. They're at the beach.
May even
basically.
be younger than that, because doesn't he say you're 5 years old when he's doing the hypnosis?
Yes,
She
yes,
may
yes.
even be 5, which is super
Right.
creepy.
So this is like 20 years before, well, whatever it is, because assuming she's like 25 years old. Anyway, they're at the beach on this lake. They run into the woods and they find, just like in the last film, they find a spooky Hammer horror style like Western castle. I mean, just to think about that, that Tony, that's exactly what you were saying. These are just brazenly going, I'm going to take as much European style horror stuff and just plop it into a Japanese setting. and see what happens. And it would be exactly as though you took one of those, Japanese style roof buildings, like from Chinese Ghost Story, and just like put it in your movie in the, in the middle of, I don't know, Duluth. And it is really strange. Anyway, they go in. She goes in. She chases her dog. She finds a ghost behind a piano. Well, not a ghost, a body behind a piano, who at first you think might be a vampire, but instead it's just a dead woman. And then the vampire makes his appearance right then, right at the beginning. And who wants to describe what this, because he's going to stay the same throughout, but this is the first time we see him. We see him and then we cut to black. So who wants to describe what the vampire looks like? Tony, you were referencing it.
Oh, I mean, he's super. Other than his creepy, weird makeup, because he's definitely way more vampiric and creepy than, say, like a Lugosi
Yes.
vampire. He's, not full on Salem's Lot, but somewhere.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Well, his makeup is like Lugosi can still pass for a,
right,
a
person.
Rich guy,
Yeah, he can hang out in a party.
Yeah. This guy is like, if he walked through a crowd, people were like,
Right.
Is it Halloween, or is that guy just the creepiest weird creature ever?
Well, never mind that every time like he walks into a room, there's almost always a close up where it comes up to him and he goes,
yeah, exactly. Like, this is truly, scary time vampire. But
I kind
he's
of
always
feel like
really
they
Natalie
were.
dressed.
I kind of feel like they were trying to channel a lot of Christopher Lee with like the extreme close-ups or whatever.
But even Christopher Lee passes, like, he can be just sort of Christopher Lee.
Yeah,
this guy's
like,
skin
glows, basically.
And they give him like that highlight.
Well, he's got the golden eyes.
Yeah, and the golden eyes.
Yeah, he's a nightmare no matter what. But he is dressed extremely nicely,
Yeah.
Although
he's always in a cool black suit.
he's outside of the times where he's wearing a Dracula cape. He isn't. I mean, he's kind of gothic, but at the same time, like, he doesn't look. He looks kind of mod. Like, even his
totally.
His hairstyle is kind of like a vampire version of a Beatles haircut.
Yeah, you're right. That's true.
It's weird because he's kind of styled. His clothing and his hair are styled kind of the time of the motion picture, the film.
Yeah,
like, he fits in if he wasn't just a horrific golden-eyed monster willing to go at any given moment. But yeah, I think it's a cool juxtaposition. I think, again, that's what a lot of these movies, that's the strength. Some people may be the weakness, but I think it's the strength of these movies.
I agree with you.
They're just throwing, like, I want to, and I think we all kind of do this as creators. If you're a writer or filmmaker or artist or whatever, you're kind of like, man, I want to take the things I like and make those things.
Yeah.
And this trilogy definitely is just that, and to me it's wonderful for it.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about how there are so many things that are borrowed from Christopher Lee, and yet so many things that are completely different, because, like you said, Christopher Lee's character could walk around inside his castle and somebody would think he's just a rich guy. But this person, if you imagine
how Horror of Dracula begins, basically.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you invite this guy, though, like, to your office party, hey, this is my neighbor, it would be absurd. he would look no more in place than C-3PO walking around inside of
I mean, can you pass that to me?
Yes.
If you introduce him as your neighbor, I'd like to drink your blood. What? Oh, the weather's nice, right?
Oh my God. So anyway, we flash forward and we learn that we are now in the present. That was the past. And Akiko is grown up. This is the little girl. Akiko is grown up, living with her super cute sister. They live together. They snipe at one another slightly. And our girl Akiko is engaged to a hot doctor.
Well, and the sister seems to be like just all over that doctor. She's constantly going like,
Yeah,
I kept thinking about
I'm sorry, the sister's name is Natsuko. not
Right.
Yeah,
Nazca.
Natsuko
They
says,
call her
yeah, they're
Nazca.
calling right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I kept thinking about the I don't, and I know I'm aging myself, but I'm as old as this movie, so I was thinking about the Cheers when the French guy who it turns out not even to be French kept going, "Oh, Woody, I'm going to steal your girlfriend." It's
Yes.
like, this chick is totally wants to steal her sister's
Right.
fiance.
Because Akiko is like, I'm feeling blue because I've been having crazy nightmares of when my dog ran away and I got scared by a demon. And the sister is like, don't talk about that so much or I'll steal your boyfriend. What? And that's intended to be cute. That's like supposed to be a cute line. And this actress is as cute as they get, so she can carry off a lot. But that, even coming from her, that's a super crazy thing to say. And
It's not just once. That's the thing. She's like, "Hey, I might steal your fiance," and the sis, she goes, "Oh, that's funny." But I think eventually you would probably be like, "Okay, you got to drop that."
right.
Yeah,
Like,
stop it now.
I don't.
Well, do
You
you
said
think
that a
that
little bit too
maybe
many
that's
times.
do you
Yeah.
think that's maybe something like maybe it was a little more subtle and it's a little more subtle in the actual Japanese language and somehow when like
It
we're
can't
getting the
possibly be.
subtitles it's just like all
No,
new
She's
the
so
way she
nuance.
obvious
acts.
even in her body language. Yeah.
Yeah, the way she acts is definitely like she's kidding, but again, she mentions it enough
Yeah.
that it's several times.
And well, what is really interesting is that very quickly in this first half of the second act, she's going to be the first one who's vamped. And this one really follows the first girl, second girl scenario that we've seen in so many Dracula movies, right? Where the
Oh
one
yeah.
who's not the main character, but who is pretty lovable usually, gets attacked first. And after she becomes a vampire and she's more free with her language, she lets go a lot of deep seated resentment against her sister. Now, it may very well be that the human half of her would never have expressed that stuff to begin with because it's only partly true and life is complicated in this. But when she becomes a vampire, she's like, I always resented you because mom and dad liked you more. And which is fun coming from a demon,
By the way, I'm totally
honestly.
stealing your boyfriend.
Yes. Right. And that she does say it again. Yeah. This actress is Nazca is played by Sane Emi, and I don't know her, but she's really interesting because
Really
she's
cute.
able to play both the super cute and also the just completely zonked zombie vampire. I don't
Well,
think
can I
she ever
just say
carries
also
off. Go ahead.
that I love their clothes. I love their clothes. They're
Oh
so
yeah,
great.
well they go shopping in the city, and it's you get to see them shopping in the city in what would have to be late 1970, early 1971,
Yeah.
and they are wearing like full on that girl outfits, and it's like overcast, it's a
Yeah,
gorgeous,
it's
gorgeous
when they
thing.
were still wearing the cute 60s clothes before they started wearing the hideous 70s clothes.
Right.
Well,
No,
that's
these
the
are
thing. I watched a fair amount of films from like definitely the mid to late '60s from Japan
yeah,
through like Criterion Channel and a bunch of stuff that I got. There's a lot of great like kind of spy slash. There's a whole section of movies that were basically delinquents on just going rogue throughout Japan kind of movies.
right,
And
right.
the one thing that's always great and it goes into Godzilla movies in the '70s is when they're doing films, they are full on super fashion in the way that like spy movies of the 60s or all the mod stuff in the 60s on film was just pressed it.
Mhm.
And that carries over into the 80s. Like 80s Japan was max 80s,
Yes.
There's no
And it lasted
subtlety
well
to
into
it.
the 90s,
Oh,
just
sure.
FYI.
And that's what I really love about a lot of these films is they are very much costume time capsules for these eras.
Mhm. Yeah.
When they decided to go full on, and actually, to be honest, when I went to Tokyo, the thing I just always felt like I was a tourist anyway, but I just felt like such a schlub. It's like if you
Uh-huh.
go to a really cool area of New York and
Yeah.
everybody's just dressed, even if whether they're going to work, whatever.
Right.
Tokyo is like that. Like in the morning at 8 a.m., there's people just dressed so much better than I ever will be.
Mhm.
Ever. Just, crossing in huge intersections. And I feel like it's kind of pressed that way in the films of these eras.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna get really cool actors and actresses, and they're gonna dress really cool and with whatever the coolest fashion of the time is. And they're no exception in this film.
I think it's just a happy accident that in this film they're still bearing, distinctly like late 1960s high fashion sort of clothes. This is like Twiggy kind of wear that these girls are wearing. And, if this movie were taking place in like 1988, you'd be seeing a lot of like, depending on your opinion, awful or awesome 80s fashions, and that would continue well into the 90s. It's kind of like, people have complained about how Canada is always like 5 years behind, and I have no idea if that's true, but I have noticed that it's true in anime and in Japanese film, is that you can watch the fashion conversation continue to go on in these Japanese films. So anyway, they're hanging out together. These girls truly do not seem to have a lot to do. I'm not completely clear. I'm not being sarcastic. I just honestly don't know what these girls do with their day. Do they have jobs?
Yeah,
I,
well, the lead is a teacher.
oh, she's a teacher. Yes, I'm sorry. I apologize. We don't see her teaching, but
Right.
yeah. She's a teacher because we
maybe
know this
it's summer
because
vacation.
I think
yes.
that's because it bleeds into although she mentions she has to work, if I'm not mistaken. Oh man, that's one of those things.
But you're right that she's but the thing is, just like with any movie, the movie's about the investigation and the stuff going on, so you don't see what you don't see. But I had completely forgotten that she was a teacher, except for the guy who was working on the boat, the local servant guy, the boat operator,
Calls her sensei.
calls her sensei. Yes,
Yeah.
so we know that, and in the same paragraph they go, well, as a teacher, you know this or that. Anyway, okay, so how does the vampire get here? Because now I've watched the film twice, and it involves the arrival of the white coffin, and
I mean, you assume that he's in there, but I don't know. It's never, because the way he appears, he could just as easily have been like, "I'm gonna ship my coffin ahead. I'm gonna catch up because I need to sleep in it later."
Well, and
But
also because if he's like the other Draculas, he needs to sleep in the earth from his own
right.
right,
place.
But either way, they get a coffin shipped where the guy's like, "Yeah, I'm supposed to bring this package," and
yeah,
the guy at the receiving end goes, I wasn't expecting a package." He's like, "Yeah, that's okay. Goodbye." Just drives
right.
off, leaving to haul this heavy ass casket
Yes,
into the.
absolutely. This huge casket. Yeah. And one thing I love that they establish here is that, I mean, I'm sure that production wise, they're filming around the same lake that they filmed the prologue around, because
Oh, sure.
it's within driving distance even in the movie. But regardless, here they establish this very interesting neighborhood that Akiko lives in. It is very cool because they all have these lovely lake houses. They all know one another. You kind of walk around. It's a neat vision of a lake neighborhood that I would frankly more associate with like, Illinois or like lake towns in Texas than with Japan. In my mind, Japan, I would never have thought that Japan would be so full of like big lake houses that look like they should be, around Austin somewhere. Uh, and I'm sure that it was scouted for that, but that's what's coming across. And they very quickly go. Well, the other piece of the neighborhood that I wanted to get to mention is like the boat rental house, I guess, which is just this one building on the beach. But it's really neat. I mean, I love this neighborhood, and it's a very well articulated vision that comes across.
Right, but yeah, so I like how he has to haul in this thing they didn't even want.
Yeah.
He unpacks it and goes, "What the hell, a coffin?" And then when he calls it in to go, "Surely you guys have made some mistake." Like, yeah. So it says here it's sent from Dracula, and nobody is like, "Wait, we don't Dracula like the Dracula?" Like, I
Have
guess
they
it
heard
I
of
think-
Dracula in this universe?
I think we can presume that this was one of those universes where Dracula is not a pop culture thing.
Yes.
I mean, kudos for him not being shipped by Alucard for once. Fucking Blue Moon, but also I like that he doesn't even. He's such a badass vampire guy who can't
Yes.
hide anywhere. He cannot hide anywhere with this like face. So
Yes.
he just has decided, you know what? Shipping my shit. It's Dracula.
Right.
Oh, who is that? Oh, Dracula. Yes. Yes, that is the Dracula from Transylvania. That is me, monster guy, right here. Pretty soon you're going to be dead, so it won't matter what I tell you, because I am, in fact, Dracula who ships his coffin randomly.
So
I want to go visit the lake for the summer.
I want to, yeah, exactly. I'm gonna summer by the lake. Yes.
I have a question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I have a couple questions. I have several questions. Okay, number one, obviously, I don't know that do we ever see him outside? Is he does he have the porphyria or whatever?
No, he's an inside vampire only.
Okay, so
you only
House
get
by the
hurt
Lake
if you are stupid enough to go into his cave. Yes.
House by the Lake is kind of a waste because, you know, I mean, I guess you can be outside by the lake at night, but whatever. Okay, other question is, so the dad.
Yeah, I'm sorry, he kills people in the woods. That's right, at night.
Yeah,
go ahead.
At night, yeah. So I'm going to jump to the end for a second because the dad says, "I'm not actually Japanese."
Yeah, let's talk about the vampire.
I'm from vampire family. And so is that meant to be like Romanian? I mean, are they like supposed to be from Transylvania or whatever?
Yeah, one would assume that they are related to the old school Dracula somehow.
Right.
Yeah, you know, there's always the possibility that he would ship his stuff and name Dracula. To Tony's point, there's always, you know, that's such a crazy thing to do. That is always the idea that he might be being mirthful or ironic, but I don't think so.
Awesome. I mean, again, it's the same thing I'm going back to, where he's like, I mean, if you can believe it, and that's going to be weird for you, nobody's going to believe you.
Yes.
Or you don't know about Dracula, and then it's just as fun for me to surprise you.
Yes.
When I pop up and go, you know.
But he's, you know, let's talk about exactly, because we don't have to go in order. I want to talk about this vampire. You already described his physical presence, and we learn at the end what his actual story is. And his actual story was that there was a family that was descended from the great vampire, or the great evil, or whatever he was called. Anyway, it was the great abomination. And so they have come to Japan, and they have built a house secluded in the woods.
And apparently vampirism skips generations. So it skips a couple generations.
It's hereditary, right? And they lived peaceful, humble lives. But now, you know, this new boy took sick at the prime of his life, 25. He became a vampire, and
he died.
Well, but he became evil. He assaulted a woman, whatever that means. He gets locked up, and secretly by his dad, locked up because he knows they have this hereditary evil. He dies locked up, and he hatches as a vampire. This is all told through two basically monologues. One from the dead-ish dad who left a letter, and one from the vampire who stops just to kind of explain more stuff. And
all of this, man, I wonder, I haven't seen anything that tells me any differently, but it feels like it was a manga first.
Yes.
The way that it's told, and I could picture how the panels would be.
Yes.
And
totally.
Because also there's a certain, the kind of the reason for all of this is there is a certain, like, this is a cool foreign thing. This vampire is definitely not of Japan, and here's all the reasons why, and why it's so different. And a lot of that is explored in a lot of like horror manga, and I could just picture it. And yeah, all that explanation is crazy, but yet it just works too.
It doesn't bother me. You know, it was fine for them to kind of stop and just have two monologues in a row. It's something that is shared. I think it's just something that Yamamoto, the director, likes, because it's shared with the vampire doll. There's a point in the vampire doll where we just stop and somebody recites everything that happened, like Hercule Poirot, just like, and then
it's exactly it. You know, it's a convention that he likes from mysteries.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's right. And in that movie, that one certainly followed a mystery. It had a mystery feel to it, a very Agatha Christie feel that isn't present here. This one is much more, you said it, Drew. This is much more following the plot of a standard Dracula movie, horror Dracula movie that just
Although
happens to have been transported to Japan.
more
Hmm.
specifically Hammer than Universal. I feel like the last movie was
Absolutely.
more Universal and this one's more
Yeah,
Hammer.
right.
But the thing that's weird about it, other than the fact that there's all these implications about sexual assault throughout the movie where people are talking about it, this movie's a lot more chaste than a
Yeah, that's
Hammer
true.
movie. Like when we think of Hammer, we think of like, them having this sort of sexually charged imagery. Certainly we think of, buxom women with low necklines and things like that. This movie doesn't have any of that, and maybe that's just because that wouldn't gel with Japanese culture per
I
se.
couldn't tell you. I mean, but
Well,
it's
it,
1971, so
yeah,
by this
you
time,
can
Hammer. Yeah, go
I
ahead, Joey. I'm
mean,
sorry.
there's all
no,
kinds of pink
you can
movies
say that,
going
but
on.
last movie that we watched, the girl had the heaving breasts, like she's like breathing
That
heavily.
is true,
So
but
they still managed to sneak it in, even with the
but
Japanese.
this movie's a lot more hammery in its presentation, but it
Yes.
doesn't really have any of that.
But Hammer didn't always either. So I mean, just imagine, how long it takes you to put together a project you're working on, and so what they're being inspired by won't be the 1971, 1969 era Hammer. It'll be the Hammer of 8 or 9 years earlier than that. So this
well,
one heavily, like, there's a moment there's a moment when Nazca gets attacked in the woods. One of the first time, I guess, is the first time that she gets bitten, and they have her framed in her nightdress, standing in the woods, her face sort of aglow, and it really, really would have been at home in like Vampire Circus or any of those wonderful mid-era Hammer stuff, because the
I
color
mean,
seems much more modern than the original
honestly,
Hammers.
even that to me though could have even been in like one of the earlier Hammers. Like it's still
Well, this
not
yeah, no, it's not.
not
There's no. It's
it's
not
not as
sexy. That's
it's
true.
not that erotic. And that's not a criticism per
Right.
se. There's certainly like an argument to be made that maybe we shouldn't be making these sort of acts sexualized at all. Because and that's a inherent flaw in the genre. But this is more an observation on my part.
It's just an artistic decision. But I mean, Hammer was only now making its twist towards more sexually explicit stuff. And by explicit, I'm really just talking about nudity, and fairly mild nudity at that. But like 1971, Twins of Evil has the Playboy girls, the twins, and there's some nudity in there. I think even Vampire Lovers had very little, because and what year was Vampire Lovers? Like 1969 or something like that. I can solve that problem.
Yeah, but I
Vampire
mean,
Lovers,
I don't think.
1970.
I think it's definitely just it's not cultural per se because like I said, I was watching a bunch of movies. Branded to Kill, which is 1967, has nudity all over the place and
Yeah.
weird erotic twists in amongst its black and white movie, in amongst its noir kind of stuff. Definitely the director just decided he wasn't going to make a pink movie. He was going to make
Yeah.
a Hammer-esque, horror movie.
It might be sexy, but it's not explicit by any means. This is a practically television ready movie. And yes, so where were we? We talked about the vampire and how he reveals his past, that he's a European, so he is in a way a contamination of. Now I don't think since these movies are remakes of European films, we can't necessarily. I don't know how much they are a critique or a commentary or metaphor about actual Japanese society. I don't know if these are just flights of fancy or if he has anything to say. But Dracula being a foreigner really matters in the original, in the Victorian original, because it has a lot to do with the sexual thrill of the foreigner as well as the inherent danger of the foreigner. from a Victorian perspective. I have no idea if that is an idea that's shared with the Japanese, because I don't know enough about Japanese culture. But he has very deliberately made a foreigner and not a Japanese person,
and yet still played by a Japanese person.
Totally still played by a Japanese person, absolutely. Which is funny, because it's not like there are plenty of British and Australian and American actors hanging around Tokyo, so they could have cast this.
I think that the idea is, of course, that this family has now been here for X amount of years, but the idea of it being this sort of foreign contagion almost,
Yes.
like I think the fact that this is like a mythology that isn't even native to Japan makes
Right.
the idea of Dracula as a foreigner almost more pronounced in
Yeah,
some
that's a really good
ways than
point.
it does in British or American films.
Yeah, I see your point, because it makes him even more exotic. Because if you're watching in the 50s in America, the vampire stories because you've seen all these movies. The Japanese have only seen them from imported movies. Their closest thing are these ghosts, like the characters that are much more like the character in the Vampire Doll. Murderous, vengeful, angry, sad ghosts. And by the way, I know that one was a half-dead person, but still, the concept is very much the same. This is a straight-up lift, and I keep grappling with whether it's just an homage, or whether if I decide to take a foreign myth and move it to my own town, am I also am I just doing homage, or am I trying to find something to say about that? Like if I take Godzilla and I put it in New York, am I just going, I would think it would be cool to have Godzilla in New York, or do I have something to say about America that Godzilla can say that other monsters cannot? And uh, I'm going to continue to grapple with this, because I don't know. I don't know if he finds anything to say, or if it ends up being just exactly what it is, just a Dracula movie in Japan.
So one thing that is interesting is almost immediately, our local handyman shipping receiving guy is turned into his previous like weirdo thrall
Yes.
from Vampire Doll. Like
Yeah.
he almost immediately gets vamped, and then he's more or less that character.
Yeah.
And again, now he kind of comes with the house.
He is, and he's so wonderful at being surly. At least in this one, he has lines, but
Right.
one of his lines is literally, "Please go away." Can't you see I have some boards to shape? Go away. He's like carving away at this thing, and I think he's messing with fishing rods or something at this point. But yeah, no, you're right. And that's also, it leads me to wonder if this is a thing in other Japanese movies, because he is a character who is a servant of one of the houses, but he's clearly a servant. He's the servant, the servant. He is there, and he's somebody for all the other characters to sort of bounce off of. And hilariously, there's a point where Akiko goes, the dude attacked me in the woods, and he tried to rape me, and the little sister goes, "Oh, that's just him." I swear to God,
Yep.
that is what she says. And again, no discussion of firing him. None. It's just never going to happen. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm with you 100%.
Okay.
It's crazy.
So anyway, all right. We haven't talked about the boyfriend, but like we said, Akiko has a doctor who's a boyfriend. He immediately starts dealing with one of the many vampire victims, and there's a whole sequence that reminded me a lot of Let the Right One In here. All of this, where because that film took place so much in a hospital, where this girl who got attacked by a vampire, I'll just call him Dracula, by Dracula in the woods, wakes up and gets called, and she throws herself out the window, and It's shocking. It's a really shocking scene. I mean, it's not particularly violent, but it's that's totally and totally shocking, and it reminded me so much of Let the Right One In, and also at least one other. The sound effects and a lot of the stuff here reminded me of Jess Franco's 1972, so it can't be. That was after it. But there are all of these like scenes where Lucy gets woken up that so maybe Jess Franco had seen this. I don't know. So where does the plot go next? This is actually a very difficult
Well,
movie
so
to
the
remember.
sister is dead in the
Oh
morgue,
yeah,
but then her body disappears because she wakes up and attacks the nurse or the whatever she is,
right.
and takes off. And at the same time, he's finding out that the doctor's finding out that the other guy who's died is also his body's also missing.
Yes.
After he how did he get killed exactly? Was it during the fight, or was like after the fight, or
Well,
how
if
did he?
it's the boat keeper, he got killed during the. He tries to kill the doctor while a vampire sister tries to drag a Kiko to Dracula, and so Driver tries to kill the doctor, but he gets struck by lightning, and
Oh, they
that's
get
the
struck
end of
by
that.
lightning, right, right. Well, so
Yeah,
that
Well,
was the
that's
fight
right.
that was so legit. I mean, it was an awesome fight. And the funny thing is, he totally screwed up his master's plan by doing that because honestly, if he hadn't bothered the doctor would have driven to town and found out that he wasn't in fact needed at all, but the vampire would have had his way. But this way, like he wrecks the car or whatever, so now the
But
guy
he's in
has
a
to go
hurry. But he's
now the guy
worried
has to
now.
go
Yeah.
back.
Well, there's really great bits though leading up to that because all this whole time we've had this running conceit that's really interesting about one of her doors is broken,
Yes.
and people could come in, and so when it finally gets fixed. Now Dracula's in the house. The sister's also, conspiring.
Yes.
She's been let in through this door, and has invited. It's kind of feels like she invited Dracula. Like, no, it's fine. Since I used to stay here, even as a vampire, I can invite you in.
Interesting. Yeah, I never
Like,
thought about that.
really,
Yeah. That a vampire, well, look, you can make up the rules, whatever rules you want, but so that means this universe has has to be invited in rule, but an exception is if it's your house,
well,
which
it
makes
feels like
sense.
that. It's never. I don't think it's explicit, but she mentions letting him in.
Yeah.
And it just really felt that way to me. And to your point, the mirror part that happens in this house, right? Correct? Or is that in the mansion where she thinks he's gone, and then
I can't remember.
there's the really great either way. And apologies if I'm getting it out of order. There's a really great bit where she goes to hide, and then he does the thing where he's like stomps around and then you're like click click. Oh,
Yes.
so
Where was
she's
that
in the
bit?
wardrobe.
Was that here? I
think so,
can't
yeah.
remember. Oh,
She
yeah.
opens the wardrobe, looks in the mirror for him. Oh, he is outside, but instead he's he fooled her using the stompy trick.
Yes. That
So
was good. That was
she's
really,
like,
and
oh, that's cool. But since he's a vampire, he doesn't cast a reflection.
it's brilliant.
And she turns around. Oh my word! There's Dracula right there. Such
Isn't
a
that
cool
amazing?
scene. So like it's set up, it's paced well.
Yeah.
The audience is pretty sure. Oh, they're gonna do the mirror thing, but you can't tell because maybe, we're again, in the same way that some Italian horror would have us. The audience is in on the gag.
Yes.
But we're watching it and going, no, don't leave the closet. Like it's cool. Because she's even, she's gotten away. She's holding her breath. She's trying to be really quiet. And this trickster Dracula, totally fools her because he doesn't have a reflection.
It's
It's
that
such
bit.
an amazing sequence.
You said Italian horror, and you're right. That is something straight out of like an Italian slasher film. In fact, the vibe I was getting was that I know we've talked about it before, that bit in Torso where the
Yeah.
girl maneuvers her way out of a door, but the killer is watching all along, and the whole audience just gets involved in like yelling at her not to do this and not to do that.
Right.
Wonderful. Boy, it's so great. Yeah. But I literally cannot remember because there's two houses. There's something about this film that makes it difficult to remember the order in which things happen. But regardless, eventually where we wind up is Akiko and her boyfriend decide to go back to the source, back to the place where she went as a little girl, back to the castle where Dracula came from, and and confront him. And that's where they find the weirdest part. So inside this house, this big creepy gothic mansion, is the vampire waiting for them somewhere in the house, but also there's this old corpse, and yet it really does appear at least one point that he becomes animate and influences the fight. What is going on with this body of this guy? Is he dead? Is he alive? What's going on with him? Does anybody know?
Of the dad?
Of the dad.
No, he's super dead. He's like, his hand came apart.
His
So
hand
he's
came
super
apart,
dead.
but later on he reaches out and trips.
Yeah, but that's the ghost. He's the ghost. That's not the dad. He's like, it's just
It's
a
not
ghost.
the
Or
body?
maybe he came back to life as a vampire, but he's a good vampire.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe
I
he's
got
an
nothing.
animated corpse of some kind. I think maybe the forces of goodness. What happens is Doctor is fighting with Dracula, and then all of a sudden the dad appears down below and trips them so that he falls to his death. It's possible the forces of goodness just animated his corpse just to trip him just a little. I don't know. That's the best I can come up with.
Can I say the other thing that bothered me? That was
Yeah.
something that really like what was going on with the dead. Like that was something that really bugged me.
How
The
in
other
what
thing,
way, Drew? Like what you
well,
mean
why
that it's
does he like as much as we can give it any rationale, like he's a ghost, he's a this, he's a that. Like why? First of all, it makes the heroes completely ineffectual because they don't actually, for all their hard work, they don't actually do anything to end the reign of terror of this vampire. The other thing that bugged me is the boyfriend through most of this movie seems like a pretty with it guy. Once he starts seeing some supernatural stuff, he accepts like, oh, okay, there must be vampires. Then, for some reason, at the last moment in the final scene, he's like, "Oh no, he only thinks he's a vampire."
Yeah, that's a
And
really
his
good point.
victims, it's of the people he has under a thrall. It's just mass hysteria, and I'm like, "You were doing so well. What's
even
going
after
on?"
even after he witnesses, so the sister dies in his arms.
Yes.
And it's like, look, I know I'm a vampire. You have to burn the corpse. Like, don't let me continue as a vampire. And he doesn't do it. She disappears. And he's like, whoa, I should have probably done that. And then at the end, oh, maybe he just thinks that's a crazy thing.
Yeah.
He thinks he's a vampire.
Yeah. You're right. It is out of nowhere. What can I say? It's very possible that you come up with an idea, you write this bit of dialogue, you're not sure what the characters are going to say, so you come up with something that it reads well in your head, and you completely forget that it's completely out of it doesn't fit at all with the stuff that you were doing earlier. And you can't bear to cut it because you're like, what am I going to replace it with? I don't know. The movie's only looking like it'll be just an hour and 20 minutes long, so I can't kind of afford to lose anything at this point.
Well, this is what I mean about the story leaving something to be desired. It just kind of feels like they kind of went, okay, we've got 3 things that we want to include. Let's build a story around it, which again is like porn, It's like,
well, it's also frankly like John Woo. I mean, he will when he and Tom Cruise were planning Mission Impossible 2, they knew the action sequences, like 4 or 5 of them, and they were like, all right, we got to come up with a story that just sort of strings these together. I feel like the story is more together than that. It just lacks a certain amount of oomph, but except for, as you mentioned, when things suddenly heat up in the action scenes.
What's
anyway,
interesting though too is they have all these brutal action scenes, especially the car. That's worth watching.
Yes.
Like that could be in any kind of action movie. And again, I keep coming back to it, but watching a bunch of Japanese noir and stuff from this era, there are a lot. The way the action is cut, a lot of it is cut like that, where it feels a little bit more brutal and a little bit more personal.
Yeah.
And perhaps less. It's not like a Shaw Brothers movie,
Right.
you know. It's
Yeah,
this
good
up
point.
close and personal kind of. I get the impression that if you turn the cameras off and just let them go, they'll have at it the way you might be with your brother, or just a brawl. But they also they don't let the guy, he's not a hero. The vampire dies by banister
Yes.
misadventure. And I mean, they when they're fighting, they loosen it, and
That was
it breaks and everything. But
well, that was the
he
only effect that I thought was really dumb. It's just really dumb. When
The
he falls, when the vampire is like, when you see him, because everything else had been really effective, like the fight and all that, and then you look down and now he's like writhing around with this banister rail sticking out of his belly, not even his heart, by the way. It's like sticking out of his belly, and he's like, it was so dumb. I was like,
yeah.
we were doing so good with your effects up until this point.
That leaves something to be desired, but
Well, and
and
also
I
it doesn't even look like it's in his heart.
That's
Right.
what I just said. It was in his belly.
Yeah.
but to me the sin that is harder to overcome is what Tony said, which is the vampire just dies through bad luck and being tripped by a ghost, and that's like, these kids didn't even really need to be there. So today,
Well,
if you were to write
especially
that,
for
yeah,
the girl, that like all that she's gone through, and that she has this history with this vampire going back to her childhood, you would think that they would give her some sort of like liberation,
yeah,
some kind of catharsis to this, but no,
no.
it's just it just sort of happens.
But
So
that's pretty common. I know personally in novels and stuff like that, I've written bits like that, and it takes an editor to come back and go, wait, what are you doing? Don't you remember your main character has to be the one who actually takes that shot, or actually, pulls the plug, or pushes down a plunger, or whatever the thing is that has to be done. Your main character has to be the one to do it, and it's easy to forget when you're actually writing it, and you notice that one of your characters is pretty close to wherever they need to be to kill the bad guy, and so you have them do it, and an editor will come in and go, stop.
in so in my
Yes.
head, I now have combined. I'm picturing it. So the guy who gets turned into bananas in House, how much better would it have been if the ghost would have been a banana turned into a banana like House, and then, which is also a really fun movie
Oh my
in
God,
its
such a
own
good
right.
movie.
But like,
Yes.
and then he had slipped on it. That would have been the only way. It would have been like, because again, he died. Like, well, they loosen the banister and it gets all messed up when they're
Yes.
tussling. But he really does die by whoa. Oh no, the banister has become a steak.
Right. Whereas you could have
Ah.
had the girl or the guy, either one of them, just give a good solid punch to the chest that would have sent him flying backwards to be impaled on a banister spike. Fine, and so it makes no sense at all that he gets tripped by his dad, but maybe somebody listening to this and go, no, you don't understand the significance of the dad being the one to trip him. Okay, fine.
Well, I
I
mean,
don't
he
get it.
is, and we get them. We do. I mean, it is the thing where he kind of rights a wrong,
Yes. Yeah.
from the
That's true.
grave, and that, I mean, that's interesting, and that does kind of. He's also ending the cycle,
Yes.
but the fact he's dead and a ghost, that's where it just kind of falls apart there. But it is interesting. I mean, maybe there's some setup that we just don't have.
Well, I should mention that physical ghosts are more common because it's something I've always found quite confusing in Asian ghost stories, is how the ghosts are pretty darn physical, and that's different from ours, and they can also do weird things like, just turn into a young woman and marry the good guy, and then reveal after 7 years, sorry, I'm a ghost, and then leave, just like weird things can happen. So that's, but it's weird. It definitely is one of those things where, us being Westerners, I have a feeling we're at a slight disadvantage watching it. Okay, so that's the end. So, are there any other bits that we've missed before we do our wrap up? We talked about the color. We talked about the scene with Nazca getting attacked in the woods and how amazing that was. The white coffin looked a lot like the white coffin that Dracula ran around in the 1958 Dracula. By the way, we talked about the cool lake neighborhood, which I wanted to bring up. There was what is that movie, Drew? What's the proto Friday the 13th that takes place in a cul-de-sac next to a lake?
Well, there's The Burning.
This is an Italian film, and I've lost it, so I don't remember. I if I think of it, I'll mention it later. But I've seen other like small neighborhood killing kind of things. But if you really wanted to take advantage of a neighborhood like this, you'd have to like create a bunch more characters so that there can be neighbors to get offed by the vampires. But instead, we keep cutting back to the hospital. And there's no sort of like central place for the neighbors to gather.
Well, the
Anyway.
hospital stuff to me is them bringing in more Dracula stuff. You
Yes.
know, they're going back to even the novel in that instance.
Yes, you know, transfusions and what have you, and you know, we're men of science, man. Yes, you know, all that stuff. So totally. Okay, so let's get our final thoughts. It was Julia, Drew, Tony, and then me. So Julia, I'm curious, what are your final thoughts on Lake of Dracula?
I mean, I think I've even more, as we've been talking about it, more settled in my idea that that story just is not. It doesn't measure up to the rest of the things about the film, because as we're talking through it, it's like we're trying to remember. I just watched this movie and I'm just like, what happens? I
I
don't
watched it
remember. Like, where
twice.
did this
I watched
go?
it twice in the
Yeah.
last 2 days.
So I
And
really feel
yeah.
like plot wise, it just falls apart. But yeah, I mean, there was, like I say, there was some really neat visual things. I like the servant character. What's his name? Oh gosh, I'm sorry. He is called, well, whatever his name is. Anyway, the guy that's the
Yeah, I
basically,
cannot remember. It is I'm sorry, he's the
I
boat
can't
operator.
the what?
He's the boat operator,
The boat
but I
operator?
can't
Okay.
I can't remember
Yeah,
what
I'm
the name of
looking
the
at the
character
list
is.
and I can't figure out which one either. But anyway, I think he is fun. A fun addition to the movie, especially like say when he's beating the crap out of the doctor. But I think that the visually it's neat. The clothing is awesome. I like the set. I like the stained glass windows that the vampire goes crashing through to scare the doctor. So there's there's a few neat pieces, and like I say, I like the effect of the deterioration, but it's probably one that I'll only remember for the fight scenes more than anything. Other than that, I think I'll probably forget it pretty quickly.
All right, excellent. Mr. Drew?
You know, I enjoyed the movie. I think it's fun. I mean, if you are into old vampire movies, I think you'll find a lot to enjoy here. I don't know how much it's going to be. I went probably 20 odd years, probably longer in between viewings. And I did, other than like a nagging, digging sensation about what was that Japanese Dracula movie I watched when I was a kid. Like, now that the mystery's solved, I don't know that I'm going to have this in my like regular rotation. I might watch it every so often if I'm just in the mood for a vampire movie and I feel like I've watched everything else to death. But certainly if you like, Hammer movies and Universal movies, I think you'll find a lot to like here.
Beautiful. And actually, I'm going to echo some of that when I get to mine. Tony, what about you?
I really dig it. By the way, the boat operator is Kisaku.
Yes.
I didn't want to interrupt.
Thank you.
Anyway, I like the movie. It is, I would say, in some ways a little bit more style over substance, but I think a lot of the movies I enjoy with this kind of weird dreamlike feel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly it makes as much sense as a ton of Italian or European horror.
Oh God, yes.
Or more.
Remember when we did Lips of Blood and we couldn't remember how the movie went, even though we had watched it several times.
Yeah, so I mean, I understand that that's, you know, a criticism, but it doesn't bug me as much. And I think there's also a lot of Japanese films that I've seen where the journey is more important than how the journey ends. I think that can be said of a lot of films, but yeah, I really like it. I love the style, the
Yeah.
color. That's kind of like, hey, we're gonna do Hammer, but we're gonna do it our own way, kind of feel. And I'm just, again, just amazed that we now get this on Blu-ray,
Yeah.
and then, or you can rent it from Amazon, or you can watch it if you have Prime. You know, having access to this is just really fantastic. And yeah, I'm super. I'm glad we're talking about it, and I'm glad we're covering it. Especially after, you know, this weekend I went to a 12-hour marathon of crazy Japanese stuff that ended with a screening of Detective Pikachu, which actually I thought was really fun. But you know, I've been immersed in Japanese movies all weekend. It's nice to talk about this one.
You know, I wanted to ask you, Tony, before we move on. So you're watching Japanese movies all weekend. Did you find that foreign films, Japanese films, for instance, demand more? I mean, they clearly demand more attention. Like it's work to watch a foreign film because you at least have to be reading the subtitles. Like you can't be like doing your homework while you're
Right, right.
watching a Japanese movie.
I mean,
You
there's
can't
tons of
even be
stuff.
looking at your phone. You got to be looking at the screen and give it your full attention.
No, I agree. And I mean, there's sometimes where I won't, like, if I'll have something on the background, since my Japanese is not so great. I mean, I can pick up phrases, but I'm not gonna follow a whole movie.
Right.
You know, in the same way I can just put a English language film on. Yeah, I think I watch enough subtitle stuff. It doesn't bug me as much, but I have tons of friends who it's very distracting to them.
Yeah.
And that's fine. You know, if that's how you view, I don't feel comfortable. Again, you should like what you like. I'm not
Yeah.
so sure. I kind of get defensive when people go, I don't like to read when I'm watching a movie. And,
Right.
you know, sometimes it takes people out enough. Like, I shouldn't judge that. But I feel like personally, I'm like, oh man, but there's all these great films that are subtitled.
You know,
But again, like, you know, life is short, man. You should like what you like. I think certain films demand more attention. I watch a ton of like all the Sentai, you know, Power Rangers, what became Power Rangers,
Sure.
Ranger shows from Shout Factory. And I have to admit that a lot of times they're on the background. It's a show originally meant for 10-year-olds.
Yes.
I'm a much older person watching these, so that's on me. But you know, the plot's there's interesting bits. I don't feel like I have to pay as much attention as I would some other things. But if it's the more serious the movie, the more I will probably pay more attention. But I like when I'm, especially in the theater, I'm there. That's the temple.
Yeah, you're there to pay attention. Yeah.
You know, I also don't have the luxury of rewinding if I feel like I missed something. But I agree that it does demand more attention, but I think I watch enough foreign films that it doesn't bother me, or depending on the subject matter. I mean, there's still just tons of films that, you know, you should be giving it your whole attention.
And when I use the phrase attention, and I said that, but it does sound negative, and I didn't really mean it that way because, for instance, I believe that I get less. I find that I am often distracted watching movies, and I'm like also flipping through a book and also flipping through my phone and also doing all this stuff. And it actually makes the movie less enjoyable than if I actually put all that stuff away, give my attention to the film.
I have a bunch of movies that I'll catch things late at night,
Yeah.
or I feel like I'm doing several things at once. I mean, I'm trying to keep two bands together and do my
Yeah.
job and think about other things, and there's plenty of distractions on your phone. I have several movies where I've started them and gone, you know what? I am not in the mindset to give this the full attention because I'm at home and I'm distracted, as
Yeah.
opposed to a cool theater like the Draft House where you have to turn off your phone. Everybody's trying to be respectful.
Yeah.
I have a queue of movies that I started the first 5 or 10 minutes of it and go, you know what? I am going to wait till I'm paying close attention to this movie because I feel like this is something I want to really spend my time on. And how it's weird, you know, you bring up an interesting point though, this is kind of going off the rails, but in a world where there
I
are
love
so
this.
many,
This is a wonderful conversation.
in a
I know we got
world
to
where
get
there
to
are
the
so
Avengers, but go
many
ahead.
distractions,
Yeah.
thinking back on, if I make a thing for consumption, if I make a film, I make a short, I make a whatever,
Yeah.
animated series, whatever that is, I want people to pay attention to that. But we live in a world where I don't always pay as much attention to the artistry
Yeah.
or the seriousness of a film. I do try to, because I as a kind of cinephile, that's how I feel. But most people, in the same way that music is often treated these days, a lot of movies are a thing that you sit on the couch and you kind of look at your phone, and you may have a tablet, or you could have a handheld video game. You could have your Switch while you're watching a movie or whatever. I think it's kind of one of those things where you have to decide whether or not you're going to give the artists involved your attention. And even I find I don't always do that. So, which is sad in retrospect, now that I think more about it. Because I would want people to do the same.
It's really, I mean, it's so funny because, like, Drew, your chosen art, which is the creation of comic books. One really strong thing about comic books is that you can't actually read a comic book while reading something else.
Nope.
I mean, it is impossible. It can't be done. You're going to have to put it. It's the effect of pausing the movie and like going over to do something else. By the way, I personally, when it's as long as I've learned to put my phone away and whatever, the existence of subtitles quickly becomes invisible. You don't notice that you're reading. In your mind, the
For
voice.
me, no, but I still know people who that's a sticking.
Is that so? Interesting.
I mean, also, if we take for granted, but if you don't have as good eyesight, or if you have dyslexia, any of those things can definitely color how you're going to approach whether or not you're going to watch a subtitle film.
Well, that's a really good point, Tony.
And so that's why I kind of softened. I used to be this like, oh, why don't you watch? Oh, is it too foreign for you? Which is a stupid gatekeeper, dumb thing to do anyway.
Yeah.
And I didn't
No, I'm with you though. I understand.
Like, I had that kind of like, we'll have a conversation, but in my head, I'm still like, man, you're missing out on so much stuff. But the more you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, well, your experience isn't necessarily everybody else's experience. If you have any kind of empathy, you can understand why that would be a problem for a potentially large audience.
No, absolutely. Well, this has been that was a wonderful conversation. My final thoughts are I'll just truncate them. I would watch this tonight if it was showing at the Alamo Drafthouse. So I really enjoyed it. However, I don't think it's as strong as the Vampire Doll. So if this is a 3-parter, Vampire Doll still in the lead. This one more a riff on Horror of Dracula. Not a bad one, but Vampire Doll was so strange and dreamy that it was a little stronger for me. We promised the listeners that we would give our conversation about Avengers Endgame, and I think we should do that. If I may start out the Avengers Endgame conversation, I know
First of all,
we
you
have.
should repeat your spoiler warning.
Okay, yes. Guys, this is the Castle of Horror show. We don't often talk about superhero movies, but all of us are geeks, and so we just wanted to capture our thoughts about Avengers Endgame because we did the same thing for Infinity War, and I want to go around the horn
and
first
someone asked.
Someone
we
actually reached out and asked and said, are you going to do it again? We want to know what you guys think. And absolutely, we also want to know what we think. I want to know what you guys think. And because we have not talked about this movie. And so this is one of those things where, just like Famous Monsters of Filmland, could have whatever the heck kind of movie they wanted in there. Same thing. So going around the horn, before you tell me your opening thoughts, I want to know if one of you has an answer for this. The question is this: Stephen Strange was right to give away the time stone because, as evidenced by this movie. So, okay, that's not a complaint. I just literally can't tie this. I can't tie the knot. I can't connect it. I've seen this movie
So,
twice.
okay.
I still don't.
That's what bothers you.
No, that's just the thing. That's just a question. So I'll tackle that one. Okay. So I have watched the movie twice. I have read so many things about it. Feel very confident that I 100% understand the time travel aspect of this movie. I may find out that I'm wrong.
Oh,
but I
right.
feel
There's also
confident.
time travel. Yes.
So,
I'm sorry,
anyways,
continue.
okay. So Doctor Strange saw in Infinity War 14 plus million possible futures, and
Yes.
only one of which they win. And by win, he means are able to get rid of Thanos and get back their dusted people. Because in this film, and of course at this point everybody knows that we're spoiling it if you haven't seen it. So I hope you're not listening anymore if you haven't. But anyway, in this film, Thanos from the past comes to the present and goes, "Oh, hey, you guys just showed me that I was gonna do this whole not decimate, get rid of half of the population, but that wasn't going to work at all because apparently everybody grieves, and then so that doesn't work because then there's not prosperity like I hope. So I'm just going to get rid of everybody." So I'm assuming that Doctor Strange sees that as one of the possibilities. Like,
Yeah.
not only do we have half the people gone, but all the people gone.
So you have to wait for Thanos to destroy the stones. Wait for whatever crazy cockamamie bullshit the superheroes are going to do to gather the stones again.
All that stuff has to happen, and
Wait for Grimace to go get the stone, to come after them,
right.
and then kill him.
Yes.
That's why Doctor Strange was right to give
So
away the time stone.
Doctor Strange was right to give away the time stone because this is the only possibility in which the stones can be used to get rid of Thanos is with this particular.
So if
this
Doctor
one
Strange
way.
doesn't give away the time stone,
then everything else goes wrong because they don't go back. They can't. They
if
can't
Doctor
do time
Strange doesn't,
traveling.
yes, you know what? This is a ridiculous place to start this conversation.
Jason, he's a doctor. Why are you questioning him?
Anyway, it's a ridiculous place to start the conversation. That's that it's interesting, and if you come up with an answer, I'll appreciate it. But let's get our opening thoughts just going around in the same direction.
Your answer lies. Also, the fiance in Lake of Dracula is also a doctor, and yet totally. You brought up the point where he goes, "Yeah, but what if he just thinks he's a Dracula?"
Right.
So can't always.
But that guy is not that guy's a regular doctor. He's not a strange doctor.
That's true.
I just feel like yeah, that doesn't completely satisfy me, but whatever.
He was gonna get the time stone anyway, but if he killed Tony, then Tony can't be
Boom!
saved the
There you go. Save Tony.
We're talking about this way too. I want to talk about other stuff.
Let's start over. That was just my opening question. I didn't mean to, but yes, Julia just solved it for me. He does it to save Tony. Boom. Okay, let's get our opening thoughts about Avengers Endgame. It was let's start with Drew this time. So let's go Drew, Julia, Tony, and then I'll go. Try to keep it to like 2 minutes, and then we'll go around to talk about topics. So Drew, Endgame. What are your thoughts?
I really, really, really liked the movie. I think that there is some internal logic problems which the internet has gone crazy over. I tend to go off of how I react to things emotionally rather than logically when I watch movies. So if something makes me cry or makes me laugh or hits me on that sort of human visceral level, which this movie absolutely did several times, that's really what I base my opinion off of. Although I do think some of the questions being battered around about how the way time travel works in this universe are of course valid if that is the sort of thing that keeps you up at night. I had some problems with other stuff in the movie, not enough to make me write off the entire movie, but there's certainly stuff that I could nitpick about. I have very mixed feelings about the way that Thor was handled in this movie. But even though I think Hemsworth himself, I think this is the best acting I've ever actually seen out of him. And I wish that the Hulk had around to with Thanos. Also, before I close out, I got loaded up with spoilers from an asshole on the internet.
Did you really?
Yes, and yet this movie still surprised me many times. In fact, I was completely blindsided when Thor chops off Thanos' head within the first 10 minutes. Like that was I don't know how that did end up on the internet, but that was amazing to me.
Wow. Okay. Wonderful. Julia, I think you're cuckoo for this movie. So lay it on me.
I am cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I love this movie so much. I love it so much. Everything that I've read that people don't like or that people have issues with, I'm like, yeah, but I love this movie so much I can't even. So yes, I agree with Drew that part of what I love is that it opens with a gut punch. It opens with you seeing Hawkeye lose his entire family, and you're just like, like you're just it's just the feels are so strong. And as a parent, this movie, and Jennifer and I texted back and forth about this movie. We were just like about to cry just texting about it, because as a parent, there are so many things in this movie that just and anybody can identify with it, but I think it's 10 times worse when you're like, so the whole thing with that, for me, it starts off with just like, oh my God, like your children have just disappeared and your spouse. And then the whole thing with, Tony trying to decide, well, do I save the planet or do I keep my little cute family? Cause my family's still intact, and he's got his adorable little daughter and she loves him 3000. And it's just like, oh my God. And then there's all the adult parent stuff, of course we've got Cassie, we've got all the kids. By the way, we know the actress who plays Cassie is actually a kid that I knew back in Dallas, because she was part of me and her mom were part of a mom's group at a church, and then so our daughters are the same age and they were like in the group together. But anyway, so that all the child relationships are amazing, but then there's of course the parent, the adult relationships with, like, you see Tony meeting his dad, and you see just all of it. So all of that stuff just made me feel so many things. And then of course just Iron Man closing out the whole cycle. I think the only thing I struggled with, but then I read stuff and I was like, okay, I'm comfortable with it, was how Cap could be 70 or 90 or whatever he is years old here if everything spins off new timelines. And I think what we finally have decided, based on what I've read, is that he jumps timelines. Like he must have used some technology to jump from his timeline back to this one, because he cannot have lived in our timeline and have the rest of the movie make sense. But other than that, I think I was pretty comfortable with how everything played out. And I think the Black Widow one is the only thing that's kind of making me just feel like she didn't quite get the ending I would have wanted for her. But everything else just is wonderful.
Tony, well, where are you as gaga as Julia is?
I don't think so.
Right.
I think it's, and again, usually when people are like, oh, I don't like this as much, it feels very contrarian.
Sure.
For me, I like a lot of the standalone movies a lot more than the Avengers movies themselves. I would like to have seen. I found myself like kind of almost distracted. Like I didn't think what I wanted it, but I would have preferred to watch a Hawkeye movie where how he becomes this cool, crazy, almost samurai guy that we find later on. I like the Ant-Man movies more than I think I like this. And that's not to say this isn't good. I was highly entertained.
Mhm.
There's a ton of great stuff. There's super cool hero stuff all over the place. I never would have believed growing up and when comics weren't that popular that this is the thing we would be getting, a 3-hour superhero movie full of all these characters that I really enjoy and have enjoyed since I was a child. All of that is awesome in my opinion. But as a whole, it's really good. I enjoyed it, but I don't have to see it again anytime soon.
Sure.
It did everything it was supposed to do. It was fun for that moment, but it doesn't really leave a lasting impression on me, other than I think that the ending was interesting, and what a way to kind of pass the torch or the shield as it was. I think that's cool.
Yeah.
There were a lot of great bits in the battle parts that definitely is everything you want in an ensemble crazy superhero movie. Like every bit of cash is up there on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so many bits in this like crazy Helm's Deep kind of battle are fantastic. And what you picture when you see like Secret Wars or anything that's that epic. But as far as lasting impression and just going, yes, that's the movie I wanted, it wasn't as much for me, even though I found it super enjoyable.
Awesome. I let's see. Do I have any opening thoughts, or do I just want to go on? My only one is I want to echo what Drew said. I've heard all the comments about the timelines and how, and honestly, it's like listening to Geordie LaForge explain warp drive. It's just bullshit, guys. Seriously, it's just
Well,
woo-woo nonsense to move the plot along.
I wonder if anybody who has those complaints has read comics for any length of time. Because let me tell you, here's my other thing that I have and why I've read less comics from the big two, and certainly Marvel. Every time I hear something cool happening in Marvel land in the comics, which I don't read on the regular, that's me. No judgment either way. I go, man, you know what? Or I see a movie, for example, right? Like the Wolverine movie where, he's in Japan and there's characters introduced. And I go, I need to check on what's happening or what's happening with Nightcrawler. And I'll read about these characters that I've loved for a long time and everything that's happened over the past decade or so. I close that tab on my browser and go, you know what? Screw this. Like, why is he part demon and Mystique had to be his mom because he's blue, and just all this stuff that has no meaning to me and takes away some of the magic and is even more complicated and was already complicated when I was reading these comics. And I personally like that it doesn't hold the same magic to me. It's weird because I will read more standalone stories or kind of Elseworld stories because I feel like they're compact and I don't have to unpack all of this stuff that's now foreign to me. At least in the continuity of the movies, there's a through line that you can follow through that kind of is outside of all this other stuff.
Well, and theoretically an end to certain characters.
Sure.
In theory.
In theory.
Yeah.
Yeah, but now that we have multiverse, it doesn't mean anything, right? Because they can pop over from any other universe.
I really do think Robert Downey Jr. is done.
Yeah, he's gone.
Well, I mean, that you can tell because of contracts. Like that, and again, knowing what I know, that kind of takes the magic out of it too, right? Like, by the way, we know he's not back because he's tired of Marvel films.
And nobody wants to pay him $1 million.
Yeah, and 10 years is he's got it. He needs to spend some of that money before he dies. I mean,
of course.
Yeah, so yeah,
but Loki can pop back in if he wants to because he's got the Tesseract and he can pop across the universe.
My point is just that. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Drew. Sorry.
No. You finish what you're going to say.
Okay. It's just a lot of people have been very worried about the logical stuff involved in the various timelines and everything. And to me, these scenes are created to give you an emotional response, and they will use almost any excuse in their pocket that they can. So they will say, every time you change the past, you create an alternate reality. But if it's good for the rule of cool or the rule of emotional, they will break that and change the rule back.
Oh, I do have a question.
It doesn't bother me. I mean, is it inconsistent? Who cares? I'm not offended. It just it just doesn't resonate with me to worry about that.
And I'm with you, because how many times have you seen a comic cover if you grew up with this stuff? And again, if you haven't, and this is, and you are worried about that, that's fine. How many times have you picked up a cover, they all die, 7 people die, and you're like, by an issue or two, either they don't die or they get brought back in that issue, or by 3 issues later, they're all back. Like, if you're bothered by the time inconsistencies of this movie, man, I can't help you. Like,
So
this is everything that's always been.
yeah. But my question is then, if we're spinning off all these different timelines, are there like millions of multiverses where the exact same thing happens, but maybe it goes wrong or whatever? Like, in other words, are the 14 million possibilities actually happening in the multiverse?
Well,
And are we going
they're
to
happening
see?
infinitely all the time anyway.
Right.
That's the thing. Even Days of Future Past brought this up in the X-Men comic. What was that, like 30 years ago, where Kitty says to Wolverine, "Well, if even if this works, we might never know it because, as far as we know, changing the past just spins off a timeline, and
Right.
we might not be in it." And that's all
Exactly.
they mention about that. They never even
Yeah.
bother to get back to that thought, because
Yep.
what are you going to do with it? We are following one marble in a
Well,
whole
that's
bunch of
why in this
marbles.
one, but that's why in this one he says specifically, I'm trying to remember who says this. I think is it Bruce? Somebody says, make sure you bring them back to this moment, not to 5 years ago, all the people,
Well,
because
that's
that
about
would
Tony, right? Because he wants to avoid erasing. Uh,
no. I think it's because he thinks that they'll spin off another timeline if they do that.
no, he
If
No,
he
he
wants to
just wants
avoid
his family
murdering
back.
his daughter with time.
No,
That's
no, no,
his.
no. Because the daughter happens before they're pregnant before Thanos. No, it's not the daughter. It has to
Hmm.
do with bring everybody back to now. Because if you bring them back to 5 years ago, then it's going to spin off a new timeline. It won't work because it won't.
Really?
It will have changed all of our past.
I was with Jason.
No,
All of his
he
whole
was
demeanor.
pregnant. They're pregnant at the beginning of.
Everything he says is, "I don't want to risk what I have."
No,
That
but
has
that's
nothing.
Every
nothing.
single
That's not
time
why
it
he
goes
wants
back
to.
to
That's
that.
not why he wants people to lose 5 years. Look, they were pregnant at the beginning of
I
Infinity War
disagree.
before
I
Thanos
See,
showed
that
up.
doesn't even begin to bother me about the 5 year thing. The 5 year thing, here's what I think about.
Yeah.
Is the unspoken ramifications of bringing back half of a population that they've missed out on 5 years. Okay, so let's put a
Yes.
theory here. Okay, husband and a wife.
Yes.
Husband gets dusted. 5
I'm going to
years.
step away
starts
for
to
just a moment.
Okay,
You can continue. Okay.
this is Manifest. There's a TV show Manifest. Have you ever watched Manifest?
I have not, but I bet you're probably right. So husband gets dusted, wife at some point during this 5 years moves on, marries someone else. Husband comes back,
Right.
or to a lesser degree of that. So let's talk about Spider-Man for a second. Spider-Man, and
I'm back.
presumably part of his, what near as we can tell from his movie trailer, most of his friends got dusted.
Yeah.
Right.
But half of his class have since graduated and gone
Right.
to college.
Yes.
Right.
So like there are all these sort of little things that would be
Yes.
happening in a society that this would go on.
Truly. Yeah. No,
I'm
it
I'm
is.
so frustrated because it's so obvious to me that the reason that they did this was because it would spin off another timeline if these people went back 5 years ago, because it just wouldn't affect their time if they didn't bring him back.
Does
to
that
make the
explain to you, Joy? Let me just ask you, does that explain to you Tony's emotional demeanor when they come to say, "Hey, let's change the past"? Because his emotional demeanor doesn't say to
No,
me,
it has
it
nothing to
sounds
do.
complicated.
Oh my gosh. Look, the baby is in utero at the beginning of Infinity War. That's the whole point of his dream. And she's like, oh no, but then she is pregnant after all, because that's why he has the dream. So the baby's going to happen regardless. His thing about being affected by them coming to see him is that he is going to die, or everybody's going to die.
I'd like a show
spin
of
it back.
hands. That was, if that's true, that was not clear to me.
It
Here's
was
the
clear
deal.
because she says, we got the
That's what I
lottery.
thought happened. That's what I
We-
thought happened.
We got the lottery and everybody else, but we still need to go save people. And he's like, well, I'm going to record this video because I think I might die, or somebody else will die, or everybody will die.
Yeah.
But I will say none of that matters because Captain America picked up Thor's hammer.
Yes, exactly. There's so many great. The funny thing is, there's so many great emotional moments that work. Cap getting to go back to Peggy Carter is awesome. I don't care if it makes no sense.
It's funny. They tried to do Sharon Carter in the modern Captain America movies.
That's right.
Which is if you grow up reading Captain America comics, Sharon Carter is a big character. That's his typical romantic interest.
Yeah.
and for whatever reason, he, you know, like the chemistry with that character was just not the same as the Peggy Carter character in the first movie. So that's what they latched on to. And I think
Yeah.
that's fine. And, you know, and as a person who has read a lot of Captain America comics, I was happy with the way that story, you know, and I even like
Yeah.
that Sam ends up getting to be the new
And
Captain
not
America.
Bucky. But and speaking
Yeah.
of, do you know one huge difference between the Marvel movies and the comics? One of the hugest characters of Captain America for all of my life until I was well into my adult years in college and probably out of college. Do you know who that was? Dead Bucky, who barely registered in this series at all. I mean, Dead Bucky was just a slight minor thing, and then he got replaced with the
Well,
Winter Soldier really
also
quickly in this series.
Also, Bucky's he's like a teenaged kid. He's considerably younger than Steve, whereas in
Right.
the movies they're closer to the same age.
That's right. Yeah, it's a good point. It's a
But
really good point.
you know, I really liked the way they closed out Captain America's story. I thought it was nice. It was sweet. I think you have to be pretty hard-hearted not to, you know, be okay with that.
Can I ask a question about that before
Sure.
you move on? About Captain America? Okay, I apologize if this is Jason being stupid. I agree. So many wonderful emotional moments, tears, yes. Okay, Captain America. Do we understand, Joy, you're going to be so mad at me for not, but do we understand that basically Captain America hung out like Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future 2 and watched himself come out of the ice in like 2012 when he was like 60 or so, and just like hung back watching Captain America run around? Like,
there are two possibilities, and we don't know which one it is. One possibility is, because it's a totally new timeline, anything goes. One possibility is he goes back and he goes, "Hey, everybody, I'm from the future. I'm going to go ahead and take over Cap's life now that other Cap is in the ice. He'll come back later, and I'm just going to be Cap." And he could just be Cap. Like, and that's fine. Other possibility is he's gonna lay low for 70 years and take on a different identity. I doubt he's just gonna stay home, because I don't think he could not be a superhero. But maybe he's gonna be a superhero that wears a mask and a black hood all the time,
yeah.
and is just not known, because actually what I've heard, and I have not watched Agent Carter, but what I've heard is that Agent Carter is married to an unknown person in the show.
Okay.
And so it's very possible that they already knew.
You're positing that he's Batman, basically, in the
that he actually does have a secret identity. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I think the Russo brothers who directed this movie, I think honestly what they're doing is they wanted to end it this way, and any of the potential continuity problems is something for because they're not going to stop making Marvel movies. So this could all be used as a setup for Kang the Conqueror.
Thank you for saying that. Yes,
You know?
no matter what illogical crap they come up with, you can always say, "Well, that's something they got to fix in another story." Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Again, like talking about how all this, you know, pseudoscience, or, you know, some of it I'm sure was actual science, but that stuff, it ultimately, again, it just doesn't matter to me. Like, okay, so like at the risk of getting a little super melodramatic, or, you know,
Okay.
why I responded to this movie the way I did. So, you know, aside of like, you know, my personal attachment to, you know, Captain America as a Marvel character, like, you know, as I've talked about on many episodes of the show, I had a twin brother growing up, and his favorite superhero was Iron Man. And this was back in the 90s, where nobody liked Iron Man. Iron Man was not a popular Marvel character, or, you know, just in general, like Iron Man was like, people were into the X-Men at that point in time, you know, those were the Marvel characters that were cool. So everybody was always like, Iron Man, I don't get it. And he was like, Iron Man's awesome. And, you know, so when the first Iron Man came out, like, you know, now 10, 11 years ago, you know, and Iron Man is suddenly the most popular superhero in the world. You know, every time one of these movies comes out, I'm always like, man, Ben, if you could have lived to see like everybody to catch up, because you no doubt saw that what was appealing about this character. And, you know, it's wonderful, but also bittersweet with that. So like, at the very end of the, towards the end of the battle, when Iron Man sacrifices himself and he says that "I am Iron Man" line one last time,
Yeah.
I was bawling. Like that might as well have been Shakespeare at this point.
Sure.
And that's really what matters, like what I got out of this movie. Like that to me was the level, that this movie was intended to be experienced on, because the science fiction and superhero stories, they're only a means to an end. This is mythology. This is meant to be experienced on a emotional, spiritual level, not a rational level.
Yeah,
At
and
least
the
that's how I
movie
feel.
the movie knows that. That's why, I mean, he throws away the lines that have to do with the science stuff are completely thrown away by Robert Downey Jr. He's like, "Oh, blah blah blah, Planck's constant, blah blah blah, whatever," and then he's like basically tells Gwyneth Paltrow, he says, "I solved it. I solved time travel," and then they're like, "Oh, cool," and that's it. That is like literally as much a thought is given to actual science about this. It's not. There's no. They know that that's not the important thing, and so they're not even going to try. Interestingly, the "I am Iron Man" lines in both the original Iron Man and in this film are both Robert Downey Jr.'s contributions to this films. Because in the first one, they weren't going to have him say it. And then for whatever reason, I guess probably during just one of the takes, he decided to say it. And I'm assuming that they had a conversation afterwards about how it just makes more sense for this particular egotistical character to not want to have a secret identity, but rather to want to own, like, get the attention. And so they kept it in. And then this one, he wasn't going to say anything. And then they actually came back and reshot it with the "I am Iron Man" because I think Robert Downey Jr. also.
His delivery of it in this movie is so, because like in the first Iron Man, it's this sort of, it's an explanation. It's an explanation point. It's like, look at how great I am. There's like, there is that bravado, and the way he says it here, first of all, it's a "fuck you" to Thanos, which is, and I don't think I have hated a blockbuster movie villain as much as I hated Thanos by the end of these two movies. And I don't really, he's boo-hiss. But the other, just like the emotionality that Robert Downey Jr. put into that delivery is really impressive, especially
he's a brilliant actor,
especially considering that he's been playing this character for so long, because he has every reason just to show up, collect his paycheck, and move on. But I've really felt like he brought it in this one. I actually feel like a good portion of the acting was really solid in this, considering how many characters that were bouncing around.
These guys are top notch, and just think of how much. There's so much being done, so many characters, and everybody handles it so well. I mean, there is not a poor performance among them, and some of them are truly amazing. Like Professor Hulk, this concept of the bigger, smarter, I don't know, just sort of a giant Mark Ruffalo. That's a wonderful creation, and they've done it many times.
That is from the comics, but like the way they implemented it was certain. I do wish he had a rematch with Thanos. Like I feel like in the final battle, the Hulk was the only character I feel like didn't get a hero moment.
No, he gets he gets the Secret Wars moment though, of holding up a mountain to save everybody else, which was cool.
Well, and also, like, I guess maybe they figured he's the one that literally saves half of life in the
he's the snap
universe. But like, I really wanted to see him wail on Thanos because of how badly Thanos wailed on him in the previous film. But whatever. Like I said, that is a nitpick. And we got to see awesome stuff like Cap with Thor's hammer, and also Thor dual wielding hammers. I mean, that's what you pay to see.
I love that the movie is quite long, but it manages to keep your attention by switching up the speed and the way the film is going. Like there's a whole period in the middle when movies tend to sag, where instead they make the movie peppier and more, hey, we're working on a plan, we're working on a caper, we're gathering the team, we're playing the Kinks, for heaven's sake, and and that's all beautiful, and because it keeps you interested, and that gets you to the last like hour when it's the big fight with Thanos, and then like 99,000 epilogues, and all of it's fine. I would have watched more epilogues. I have a question. Don't you think this thing should have an intermission? Like, what the hell
No.
is with that? So you're not into that idea?
I don't think it matters, but I don't think it has to, like, sure, I guess it would have been nice, but like, I didn't actually feel at any point this movie dragged.
Yeah.
If you don't think it should
Like,
have an intermission, what do you think about maybe instead, could this have been Endgame Part 1 and Part 2 coming out in
No
May?
way. That's
May and
already
They
what we
act-
had. No, we already
yeah.
had Infinity War was the part 1. This is part 2.
But this
No,
is
I
3
thought it was
hours
great.
long. I'm
I
just
thought,
saying,
who cares? It's 3 hours long. There's plenty of movies that are 3 hours
I
long.
would have been happy to have Endgame Part 1 in May and Endgame Part 2 in
No way. I would have been freaking out. I would have been like impossible to be around.
That would have felt like they were milking it to me.
Interesting.
Like, I think that the 2 movies that we got were fine. And yeah, she's right. We, like maybe 20 years ago when 3-hour movies were less common, but come on, Jason.
20 years ago, Saving Private Ryan came out, and
Yeah.
it was also 3 hours, and it also did not have an intermission. The only person doing
Yeah.
intermission anymore is Tarantino, basically.
And that's sweet. Some people got to take a leak, like I can hold it.
Yeah. No, I got you.
Like
Lady had an intermission. Reds had an intermission. Dr. Zhivago.
I think you just missed the intermission. You want to bring it back.
I do.
Just admit that this is some retro fetish thing.
Some weird thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Some guys like seam stockings and updos. You like intermissions.
Yes.
Okay.
I was just remembering, seeing Rhodey, who's always been War Machine in these movies. I was just remembering that my first Iron Man was really Rhodey, because the first Iron Man comic I got when I subscribed to Iron Man was Iron Man 170, which is the one where Rhodey puts on the Iron Man suit for good. I think he had maybe had tried it on once or twice before. I really can't remember. But this is the one where he puts it on for good because Tony's too drunk to handle the Iron Man costume anymore, and like chronically all the time drunk, basically. And so Rhodey became Iron Man. This is long before the concept of War Machine and all that stuff. And because they like Robert Downey Jr. so much, they never did that storyline, which is fine. But Rhodey, I feel like, should become Iron Man. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but it would be neat.
No, I think the kid's going to become Iron Man. The kid that they stuck in the last scene there, everybody was like, "Who the hell is that kid from Iron Man 3?"
Harley was his name.
Harley, yeah. I think he's going to become Iron Man.
Or they could do Ironheart.
What was that? What was Ironheart?
That is a young African American lady. I'm not overly familiar with the actual stories from it, but it's about 2 years ago they introduced the character. She's a young African American lady who builds herself a suit of Iron Man armor. So
okay.
Yeah, there's this stuff that, or they could have Pepper Potts be Iron Man. I mean, hey, there's stuff they could do. I loved War Machine with Nebula in this movie. They were a surprisingly good duo, but like War Machine got probably the most unfortunate line in the movie to me, which made me just grind my teeth.
What was that? I have no memory of this. What are you talking about?
So, a big thing that everybody's talking about on internet is Fat Thor. And there's a lot of, and that's not my terminology. That is the internet's terminology.
Sure. Cheese Whiz. Yes.
Right. Okay. So at that point in the movie, like a lot of those jokes, the first scene where Hulk actually goes to the talk with Thor was great. It was character-based humor. Hemsworth and Ruffalo and everybody are all great in it. I like that scene. By the end of the movie, I found myself a little bit disturbed that Earth's mightiest heroes find it so easy to pick on someone that is very obviously clinically depressed with great reason.
Yeah.
And that cheese whiz line was, I was just like, okay, if there was one thing that I wish they could like just take, I wish they could take like half of those jokes
Yeah.
out of the movie, because like you know, like it wasn't even so much that he had like, you know, that they made Thor, you know, basically an alcoholic, or that he had gained weight, or any of that stuff. In fact, I was kind of impressed that he didn't magically have washboard abs at the, you know, end of the movie. You
Yeah.
know, like I think that was in a I don't know what message it sends, but like it, you know, I think it was a little better writing compared to the way it was handled
Yeah.
throughout the rest of the movie. But like most of those jokes, they weren't even funny, they were groan inducing. And
No,
again,
I
it just
agree.
like made the Avengers seem like assholes, because if you really stack everything that has happened to Thor throughout all these movies back to back to back, if there was ever a guy that you know
Needs help.
deserves to feel depressed and needs
Yeah.
help, needs his friends, it's Thor. And they were kind of being dicks to him. And I
Yeah.
just was just like, you know, I know a lot of people found it funny, but you know, maybe I'm just too much of a Pollyanna these days. But like
No, those
I
are
was
good
like,
points. Those are good
yeah.
points.
I think they're very good points, considering how much these movies go out of their way to be pretty sensitive and inclusive. Fat shaming is apparently not
Well, not
something that
just
they're
he's
like
not just saying
aware of.
fat shaming. He's also saying, you know, depression shaming. I mean, the fact
Yeah,
Right.
that they're not, you know, that they're not
it goes
actually
deeper.
giving him any
It
support.
goes deeper than just fat
Can I
shaming.
can
It's
I
because,
and actually, to that point, the funny thing is what they handle really well. So is the depression of everybody else. I've always thought that in our country we have a thing where if somebody gains a whole bunch of weight, we have a tendency to suddenly not recognize them anymore. You know, they become a totally new person that is that and that's a weird psychological thing that we have that's you know I'd love to see a movie that actually tried to grapple with that. But
well, with Thor in this movie, I think it was kind of a mixed bag, because like Hemsworth is legitimately great in this
yes.
movie. Like his performance is
And his scene with
wonderful.
his mom, despite the fact that she also makes a joke about his weight, is
She doesn't
beautiful.
make a joke about his weight. She
Yes,
just says,
she says, "Eat a salad."
That is, in fairness
yeah,
to that, that is something I could see a mother saying.
totally.
Like
Yeah.
that to me was less
Because she
forced.
had already been kind, because she said, you know, the future's been
Oh,
unkind to
absolutely.
you and all that
Yeah,
stuff. So,
like the way the rest of them they handled it was more like, oh, they're the Avengers, they have to have quips. And
Yes.
since this
Lebowski's a
guy
funny line, by the way.
Lebowski
Lebowski,
is a
that's
funny
more
line.
like the reason that's a funny line
although
is go ahead. All right.
I think you're about to say the same thing I was going to say, so I'm curious now. What
Well,
were you going to say?
maybe not. But my
That
feeling
Jeff
was
Bridges is in the movie. Is in the original.
Yeah,
that was not my thought. It's
Oh,
perfectly fine. But my thought about the Big Lebowski was nobody nobody's critique of Jeff Lebowski is that he is fat. In other words, calling him the Big Lebowski is this is just what Thor looks like now. He looks like the Big Lebowski. Who cares? That I thought that was a funny line. But I wanted to go
yeah,
back to there is a beautiful moment that I was really struck by where Black Widow and Captain America are just hanging out, and she's giving us kind of the emotional I want of the movie, where she's kind of eating her little sandwich and saying, you know, that she's just feels sad all the time.
yeah.
That's amazing.
Okay,
It
so
was so well handled by her.
I've got a couple things to say. One is that yes, Jeff Bridges is in the original Iron Man as the bad guy business partner. But anyway,
Obadiah Stane, baby. Yeah.
yes, but okay, so she is depressed not only because of everything that's happened, but more because of Ronan, because her friend Clint has gone rogue and is like killing the crap out of everybody, and she's really sad for him.
Yeah.
So that one is particularly, I think, what she was focused on there. I wanted to say though that I didn't like one thing I didn't like is that I don't have a problem. I've read on the internet that people are saying, you know, some people say they shouldn't have wasted so much time on Ant-Man exploring the world. I didn't have a problem with that. What I don't understand is how they managed in 5 years to create this amazing memorial to everybody who died, but can't be bothered to pick up the trash and sweep the streets. Like, it seems to me like they kind of would have figured out by this point how to clean stuff up, at least, even and probably not have built the memorial yet. The memorial would still be in the planning stages.
I don't know. I think it's possible that the thing is, if you erased half the people, you would really disrupt things a lot. It's
Yeah, but I feel
complicated.
like cleaning up the streets would be one of the priorities of, like, okay, if we're gonna rebuild, we got to start by cleaning up.
I don't know.
streets.
I can't tell you. I mean, it sounds to me like there's just been a cascade of catastrophes because half the
Probably.
people were around, and all the people who left don't seem to be all that motivated, and governments are falling apart. And
Which is why I come back to
depression.
the memorial being built. I'm like, really? They got that thing built in 5 years? Okay.
right, honestly, that did not bother me. But I understand.
Can I say one more thing about Thor and then I'll shut up?
Sure.
To the movie's credit, at the end of the movie, like he, in the final battle, like he's still like, for whatever he's going through, he's still like a force to be reckoned with, which I thought was nice. Like
Yes.
he really whomps on Thanos, like he looks like a badass, like I said, to me, like I don't want anybody thinking that I'm writing the whole movie off based on this. I'm not. I'm saying that it could have. I think some of that stuff isn't going to age particularly well, and I think that maybe some of that stuff could have been left on the cutting room floor for a whole overall better movie, or to what you were saying, Jason, maybe a slightly shorter one.
Yes. So yeah, is there anything else that we should bring up? I really do like Professor Hulk. I mean,
Do you guys think that Black Widow that
oh
Nat
yeah,
is,
this was the only other thing.
do you
This is
think
the
that
debate.
Nat is in love with Clint or not?
No, I think it's completely platonic.
I'm with you,
and I think that's
agree.
wonderful because you never see platonic friendships between men and women in films, and I would
Don't you think that Fonzie and Richie would fight to be the one to get thrown over the cliff, Julia?
Oh yeah,
But those are not gay. They're not gay. These people are both heterosexual, so presumably they would have but I just felt like the first time I saw the movie, I felt like she was in love with him. The second time, after having had this argument with Jason, I was
she
like,
is in love with
okay, I
him.
can
She
see
loves
him.
him like a She loves him like a
Yeah.
brother.
No, but I mean in love, like not love, just like platonic
Yeah.
love.
I really hope that they we'll probably never see that because there is a Black Widow movie, but Lord knows what it'll be like. I hope that they would never go there because it would absolutely ruin their relationship for me, because I feel like you never see deep friendships between men and women in movies that aren't somehow played as a will they won't they
as a
thing.
Precursor to something else.
Yeah,
it's all
like
because it's all because of damn Nora Ephron with her
Yeah.
philosophy that it was impossible, which has infected us all. Yeah.
I love the fact that they are just best friends and partners, and he's got his other family, and she's apparently incredibly unlucky in love, but that's unfortunate. But like I like the way their relationship has been handled throughout the Avengers movies. I think that's a healthy thing to put out there for.
Well, it was definitely a
people to see.
tearjerker, that whole scene.
Oh
sure.
yeah. Although,
Yeah.
okay, one other thing about that. So if Captain America has to go back and put those stones back, does that mean he's going to see the Red Skull on
He'll
the
see the
planet?
Red Skull.
Awkward.
Yes, he'll go, "Oh, floating red guy, you're the wow, Skull, so good to see you." Yes.
I hope.
Well,
I hope
actually, no. I think that the Red Skull got to take leave once the stone was gone because he didn't have to protect it. And then as soon as it reappeared, he popped back, and he's like, "Crap! I
Yeah.
have to come back here again."
So really,
And I don't
really super
necessarily,
good
I don't
point.
think necessarily he saw the Cap because Cap might have been gone by that point.
I just want to imagine Cap beating him with the hammer of Thor a little bit.
I do want to mention that no joke. I do want to mention that The Hulk has a line, yet another line that's thrown in where he goes, "Hey, I really did try to bring that back." So, truly, that line is enough to basically that line is the atom thin edge of the wedge that can probably bring Nat back.
Yeah,
It's like,
because
well,
Jason was thinking that maybe it worked, but she's like stuck on that planet because she
or
can't
she's
go.
anywhere, any number of things that
Yeah.
that could have happened with her. So, yeah.
All right. Well, it's pretty late, so we should probably
Yes,
wrap
we
it up.
should we
Yeah,
should call it.
we
But I
should
really
call it an
appreciate you guys
Endgame.
being on. Yes, indeed. And y'all, we will be back next week to discuss the evil of Dracula. And actually, I'm sorry, it might be 2 weeks
Week
hence, but we'll be
after,
back
yeah.
next episode to discuss the evil of Dracula. Um, Tony, Drew, Julia, thank you so much. Everybody will be back soon. Adios.
All right. Good
Good
night.
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 Night.